TIFU by leaving my loyal girlfriend for someone better and losing everything I had built over the past 6 years. I don't deserve sympathy, and I'm not looking for it. I just need to get this off my chest because I have no one left to talk to, and it's entirely my own fault. I met Danielle when we were both 24 years old. She was working as a receptionist at a dental office, and I was doing entry-level IT work for a small company. We met at a coffee shop when she accidentally grabbed my drink, and instead of being annoyed, I thought it was the cutest thing I had ever seen. We started talking, and I asked for her number, and the rest just happened naturally. Danielle wasn't flashy or exciting in the way movies make you think love should be. She was steady and kind and reliable. She remembered every little thing I ever told her. She would surprise me with my favorite snacks after a hard day. She would sit with me for hours when I was stressed about work, even though she had her own problems to deal with. She made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. We moved in together after 2 years of dating, and life just worked. She handled the bills and kept our apartment clean and made sure we always had groceries. I focused on advancing my career, and she supported every decision I made. When I wanted to go back to school for a certification, she picked up extra shifts to help cover expenses. When I got a promotion that required longer hours, she never complained about seeing me less. She just adjusted and made it work, because that's who she was. By the time we hit our 5th year together, I was making good money, and we had a nice apartment and a savings account and plans to buy a house. Danielle started talking about marriage and kids, and I would nod along and say, yeah, someday. But something inside me had shifted, and I didn't even realize it at first. The more successful I became at work, the more I started to notice that other women were paying attention to me. I had gotten in better shape and bought nicer clothes, and suddenly I was getting looks I had never gotten before. A new girl named Vanessa started at my company, and she was everything Danielle wasn't. She was tall and confident, and dressed like she belonged in a magazine. She laughed at all my jokes and touched my arm when she talked to me, and made me feel like the most interesting man in any room. I knew it was wrong, but I started comparing them. Danielle was pretty, but Vanessa was stunning. Danielle was supportive, but Vanessa was exciting. Danielle felt like home, but Vanessa felt like an adventure. I started to convince myself that I had settled. I told myself that I had gotten with Danielle when I was nobody, and now that I was somebody, I deserved somebody better. I started pulling away from Danielle. I would stay late at work even when I didn't need to, just to talk to Vanessa. I stopped being excited to come home. I started picking fights over stupid things just to create distance. Danielle noticed something was wrong, and she tried so hard to fix it. She planned special dinners and bought new clothes and asked me constantly what she could do to make me happy. But nothing she did mattered because in my head I had already checked out. I had already decided she wasn't enough. One night after we got into another pointless argument, I told her I wasn't happy anymore. I told her I felt like we had grown apart, and I needed space to figure out what I wanted. She cried and begged me to go to counseling and work on things, but I refused. I told her it was over, and I moved out that weekend. 2 weeks later, I asked Vanessa out, and she said yes. I felt like I had made the right choice. Here was this beautiful, ambitious woman who wanted to be with me, and I had finally upgraded my life. The first few months were everything I thought they would be. We went to fancy restaurants and took weekend trips and posted pictures that made everyone jealous. I felt like a new man living a new life that I actually deserved. Then reality started to set in. Vanessa was exciting, but she was also exhausting. She needed constant attention and validation. She got angry if I didn't text her back fast enough. She expected expensive gifts and got cold if I didn't deliver. She never asked about my day or remembered things I told her. She talked about herself constantly and showed zero interest in my life unless it benefited her somehow. I started missing the little things Danielle did, making my coffee just right, rubbing my back when I couldn't sleep, actually caring when I vented. 8 months in, Vanessa met some guy at her gym. Late workouts, guarding her phone. She broke up with me over text, said he was more her speed. I cried in my car, not because I loved her, but because I finally understood what I'd thrown away. I sent Danielle a long apology. 3 days later, she replied. She'd spent months crying over me, had finally healed, and couldn't be part of my journey anymore. She's now engaged to a guy from her church. They bought a house. She looks happier than ever. I'm in a studio apartment eating takeout alone, wondering how I convinced myself what I had wasn't enough. Last week, my mom ran into Danielle's mother and found out something that completely broke me. My mom's voice on the phone sounded different from usual. She asked if I was sitting down, and I told her I was standing in my kitchen making coffee. She said I should sit down for this. I put the phone on speaker and lowered myself onto the couch. She told me she had run into Danielle's mother at the grocery store, and they had talked for a while. She said Danielle's mom told her something she thought I needed to know, even though it was going to hurt. My mom paused for so long, I thought the call had dropped. Then she said Danielle had been 3 months pregnant when I broke up with her. The coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. My mom kept talking, but her words turned into noise. She said Danielle had a miscarriage 2 weeks after I moved out. The doctors told her it was from stress and emotional trauma. My mom asked if I was still there, and I couldn't answer. I hung up without saying anything and sat on my apartment floor staring at the broken mug. An hour passed and I didn't move. I couldn't think or feel or process what she had told me. I just sat there while the coffee soaked into the carpet and my phone buzzed with texts I didn't read. Work the next day felt like moving through water. I sat at my desk and stared at my computer screen without seeing anything. People talked to me and I responded, but I have no memory of what anyone said. I kept replaying that final month with Danielle in my head. She had been tired all the time, and I had assumed she was being dramatic. She cried more easily than usual, and I had gotten annoyed instead of concerned. She wanted to talk about our future, and I had shut her down because I was already planning my exit. The memories came back in waves, and each one made me feel sicker. She had been carrying our child, and I had been too busy texting Vanessa to notice. She had needed me, and I had abandoned her for someone who made me feel important. My coworker asked if I was okay, and I said I was fine. I wasn't fine. I went to the bathroom and threw up. The truth hit me on the third day of barely functioning. Danielle never told me about the pregnancy or the miscarriage. She knew I had already checked out of our relationship. She saw me pulling away and choosing someone else, and she protected me from the guilt I deserved to feel. She went through the trauma of losing our child completely alone because telling me would have meant asking for support from someone who had already decided she wasn't worth his time. She loved me enough to shield me from consequences, even while I was destroying everything we had built. I sat in my car in the work parking lot and understood that she was a better person than I would ever be. She had every right to tell me, to make me share that pain, to force me to face what my choices had cost. Instead, she healed in silence and moved forward with her life, while I got to pretend everything was fine. I called in sick to work and spent 3 days in my apartment going through old photos on my laptop. There were hundreds of pictures from our 6 years together. In every single one, Danielle was looking at me with genuine love in her eyes. She looked at me like I was everything she needed. I was looking at the camera in most of them. Even in our private moments, I had been thinking about how we looked to other people. I had been focused on my image and my success, and whether we seemed like a power couple. She had been focused on me, and I had been focused on myself. One photo showed us at a company party from 2 years ago. Danielle had her hand on my arm and was smiling at something I had said. I was looking past her at someone more important. The pattern was there in every picture once I knew to look for it. She had been all in, and I had been halfway out the door for years before I actually left. My mom called back on the 4th day. She asked how I was doing, and I told her the truth, which was that I wasn't doing well at all. She said she had been worried about me for months but didn't know how to help. She admitted she had hoped I would realize my mistake and try to fix things with Danielle before it was too late. She said Danielle's mom told her about the pregnancy and miscarriage because she thought I should know what my choices really cost. My mom said she almost didn't tell me because she knew it would break me. But she decided I needed to understand the full weight of what I had done. She said Danielle had asked her mom not to tell anyone about the pregnancy or the miscarriage because she didn't want people to pity her or judge me. Even after everything I had put her through, Danielle was still protecting my reputation. My mom's voice cracked when she said she wished I had been the man Danielle deserved instead of the man I chose to become. The panic attack started a week after my mom told me. I would be sitting at my desk or lying in bed and suddenly I couldn't breathe. My chest would tighten and my hands would shake, and I would see Danielle alone in a hospital room losing our baby. I calculated the timeline obsessively. The miscarriage happened 2 weeks after I moved out. That was right when Vanessa and I started dating officially. I was taking her to expensive restaurants and posting pictures of us looking happy while Danielle was going through the worst experience of her life. I checked my old text messages and found proof that made me physically sick. The day Danielle was in the hospital, I had sent Vanessa 12 texts about where we should go for dinner. I had been deciding between Italian and sushi while Danielle was losing our child. The panic attack that night lasted 2 hours, and I ended up on my bathroom floor sobbing into a towel so my neighbors wouldn't hear. I tried to write a message to Danielle for 2 hours straight. I typed and deleted and retyped 100 different versions. I'm sorry didn't cover it. I didn't know felt like an excuse. I should have been there was true but useless. Everything I wrote sounded selfish because it was selfish. I wanted to reach out to make myself feel better, not to help her. She had already told me she couldn't be part of my journey anymore. She had healed and moved on and built a new life. Contacting her again would just rip open old wounds for my benefit. I finally deleted the entire message and closed my laptop. There was nothing I could say that would matter. The time to be there for her had passed, and I had chosen to be somewhere else. Apologizing now was just another way of making her trauma about my feelings. Rowan caught me in the break room at work, looking like I hadn't slept in days because I hadn't. He asked if I wanted to grab lunch and talk. We went to a sandwich shop down the street and sat in a corner booth. He said everyone at the office had noticed I was falling apart, and people were worried. I told him about the pregnancy and the miscarriage, and watched his face change as he understood what I had done. He was quiet for a long time before he said that everyone at the office had thought I was making a huge mistake leaving Danielle for Vanessa. He said people talked about it in private, but nobody felt like they could say anything to me directly. I had made it clear I didn't want input on my personal life. Rowan said watching me chase Vanessa while Danielle was at home waiting for me had been hard for people who knew us both. They saw me becoming someone they didn't respect. Rowan told me he had met Danielle once at a company holiday party 3 years ago. He said she spent the whole evening making sure I was comfortable and talking to the right people for my career. She introduced me to managers I needed to know and made sure I had opportunities to showcase my work. He said it was obvious she was invested in my success in a way that went beyond normal support. She genuinely wanted good things for me and worked behind the scenes to make them happen. Rowan said she was clearly the person who believed in me before I believed in myself. He remembered thinking I was lucky to have someone like that in my corner. He said most people don't find that kind of partnership, and I had thrown it away for someone who only cared about what I could do for her image. I asked Rowan what people at work actually said about the situation. He was honest in a way that hurt, but that I needed to hear. He said most people lost respect for me. They saw me become arrogant after my promotion and treat someone good like she was disposable. People who had liked working with me started avoiding me because they didn't trust my character anymore. Rowan said the way you treat people when you think you don't need them anymore shows who you really are. I had shown everyone that I valued status over loyalty and ego over genuine connection. He said some people had hoped I would realize what I was doing and fix it. But I had been too caught up in feeling important to notice I was becoming someone nobody wanted to be around. The professional reputation I thought I was building by dating Vanessa had actually damaged how people saw me as a colleague and as a person. I left the office feeling like I'd been gutted. Rowan's honesty about how people saw me now made everything worse because I knew he was right. That night I couldn't sit still in my studio apartment, so I grabbed my keys and drove without really thinking about where I was going. My car seemed to know the route better than I did, and before I realized it, I was pulling into the parking lot of the coffee shop where Danielle and I first met. The same brick building with the green awning. The same crooked sign hanging above the door. I sat in my car for 10 minutes trying to decide if going inside was a terrible idea or if I just needed to see something familiar. Finally, I got out and walked through the door, and the smell of coffee and pastries hit me like a memory I'd been trying to forget. The same barista was working behind the counter. Sarah. She had worked there for years and had seen Danielle and me come in together dozens of times. She looked up when I walked in, and her face broke into a huge smile. Sarah asked where Danielle was and if she was parking the car. The question felt like a punch to the stomach, but I managed to keep my voice steady when I told her we weren't together anymore. The smile dropped off Sarah's face and she looked genuinely upset. She said we were her favorite couple because of how Danielle would light up whenever I walked in. She talked about how Danielle used to come in early sometimes to make sure she got my drink order perfect. Sarah said Danielle would quiz her on whether I liked extra foam or just a little, and would get anxious if she thought Sarah might mess it up. I stood there listening to this woman describe things about Danielle that I had taken for granted and never even noticed. Sarah said she always hoped she'd find someone who cared about the little things the way Danielle did. I mumbled something about needing to go and left without ordering anything. I sat in my car in the parking lot and put my head against the steering wheel and tried not to think about Danielle coming in early to make sure my coffee was right. I drove around for another hour because I didn't want to go back to my empty apartment. Without planning to, I ended up on the street where Danielle and I used to live together. I parked across from our old building and just sat there staring at the windows of what used to be our apartment. A young couple was moving in. I could see them through the window carrying boxes and laughing about something. The guy picked the girl up and spun her around, and she was laughing so hard I could hear it through the closed car windows. I remembered when Danielle and I moved in 6 years ago, with nothing but enthusiasm and cheap furniture we had to build ourselves. We'd spent an entire weekend putting together a bookshelf that came with instructions in 3 languages none of us could read. Danielle had laughed when I put the back panel on upside down, and we had to take the whole thing apart and start over. We'd ordered pizza at midnight and eaten it sitting on the floor because we hadn't set up the table yet. She'd said it was the best pizza she'd ever had because we were eating it in our home. I watched the young couple in the window and felt like I was looking at ghosts of who we used to be before I ruined everything. I finally went back to my studio apartment around midnight. The landlord had left a note on my door asking me to call him about renewing my lease. I crumpled the note and threw it on the counter and tried to sleep, but couldn't. The next morning, the landlord knocked on my door before I left for work. He was a nice older guy who had always been friendly, but he looked concerned when I opened the door. He asked if I wanted to renew my lease for another year and mentioned that I seemed unhappy here. He asked if I was planning to move somewhere bigger or move in with someone. I had to stand there and admit I had no plans beyond staying alone in this tiny studio. He looked uncomfortable and said he just wanted to make sure I was doing okay because he'd noticed I never had visitors and always looked tired. I told him I was fine and signed the renewal paperwork right there in the doorway just to end the conversation. After he left, I looked around at my studio apartment with its one window and its tiny kitchen and its bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. This was my life now. This was what I had traded Danielle and our nice apartment and our future for. The panic attacks started getting worse over the next week. I'd be sitting at my desk at work and suddenly couldn't breathe. My heart would race and my hands would shake and I'd have to lock myself in the bathroom until it passed. I couldn't sleep more than a few hours at a time. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning thinking about the baby Danielle lost and wondering if the stress of our breakup really caused the miscarriage. The guilt was eating me alive and I knew I needed help. I found a therapist named Micah Ingram who had good reviews online and made an appointment. His office was in a small building downtown with plants in the waiting room and soft music playing. Micah was younger than I expected, with glasses and a calm voice that made me feel like maybe I could actually talk to him. He asked me what brought me in and I just started talking. Everything came pouring out. The whole story of Danielle and Vanessa and the pregnancy I never knew about and the miscarriage and how I'd thrown away the best thing in my life because I thought I deserved better. I broke down in that first session explaining everything I threw away and could never get back. Micah just listened and handed me tissues and didn't judge me even though I deserved to be judged. In our second session, Micah asked me to describe what I thought I wanted when I left Danielle. I had to really think about it, and the answer made me feel sick. I told him I wanted external validation and status symbols. I wanted people to look at me and think I had won at life because I had a beautiful girlfriend and career success. I wanted to feel important and special and like I had upgraded from who I used to be. Micah asked if any of that had made me actually happy, and I had to admit it hadn't. He asked what made me happy with Danielle, and I realized it was the opposite of everything I thought I wanted. It was coming home to someone who was genuinely glad to see me. It was having someone remember that I liked my coffee a certain way. It was feeling like I mattered to someone not because of what I could do for them, but just because I existed. Micah wrote something in his notebook and said we had a lot of work to do. Over the next several weeks, I saw Micah twice a week. We talked about my relationship with Danielle versus my attraction to Vanessa, and slowly I began to understand the difference. My relationship with Danielle was real partnership. We supported each other and built a life together and made each other better. My attraction to Vanessa was just ego. She made me feel like I was winning some game I didn't even realize I was playing. Danielle made me a better person by challenging me and supporting me and believing in me. Vanessa made me feel like a better person without actually being one. She was a mirror that reflected back an image I wanted to see, but that image wasn't real. Micah helped me see that I had confused feeling important with actually being important. I had confused being envied with being happy. I had confused external validation with internal worth. In one session, Micah had me make a list of what Danielle actually did for me versus what Vanessa did. He gave me 2 pieces of paper and told me to be specific and concrete. I started writing and Danielle's list just kept growing. She picked up my favorite snacks without being asked. She rubbed my back when I couldn't sleep. She listened to me vent about work even when she was tired. She picked up extra shifts to help pay for my certification. She never complained when my promotion meant longer hours. She kept our apartment running smoothly so I could focus on my career. She remembered every story I told her about my coworkers and asked follow-up questions weeks later. She made sure I ate when I was stressed. She planned special dinners when I needed cheering up. The list filled 3 pages of concrete supportive actions that showed how much she invested in our relationship. Then I looked at Vanessa's list and it was just 2 things. Made me feel attractive. Impressed other people. That was it. That was all she had given me. I stared at those 2 lists and felt like the biggest idiot who ever lived. A few days later, I was scrolling through social media during my lunch break and saw that Vanessa had posted pictures with a new guy. He was tall and good-looking and driving a car that cost more than I made in a year. The caption was something about finding someone on her level. I looked at the pictures and felt nothing but disgust. Not at her, but at myself for being exactly like her. She was always looking for the next upgrade just like I had been. The pattern was so obvious now. She dated people for what they could give her and how they made her look, and as soon as someone better came along, she moved on. I had done the exact same thing to Danielle. I had looked at her like she was a stepping stone to something better, instead of seeing her as the destination. Vanessa and I deserved each other, but Danielle deserved so much better than either of us. That weekend, I went to the grocery store to buy food for the week. I was in the produce section trying to figure out if I should buy vegetables I probably wouldn't cook when someone said my name. I turned around and saw one of Danielle's friends, Rachel. She had been at our apartment dozens of times for game nights and dinners. She looked at me and her expression was cold, but not cruel. She said Danielle was doing really well now and had found someone who appreciates her worth. I asked how Danielle was doing, and Rachel said she was genuinely happy. She said Nolan treated her like she was precious and never took her for granted. Rachel looked at me for a long moment and then said she hoped I learned something from losing Danielle because not everyone gets a second chance to understand what real love looks like. Then she walked away and left me standing there in the produce section holding a bag of apples I didn't even want. I asked Rachel if Danielle ever talks about me. She stood there in the grocery store aisle with her basket of vegetables and looked at me like she was deciding whether I deserved an honest answer. She said Danielle rarely mentions me anymore. When she does, it's with sadness about time wasted rather than anger, which somehow feels worse than if she hated me. Rachel said Danielle told her friends that she spent 6 years investing in someone who was always looking past her toward something better. She said watching Danielle with Nolan made everyone realize how much I had failed to value her. Nolan looks at Danielle like she's the most important person in any room. He asks about her day, and actually listens to the answer. He plans dates around things she enjoys instead of things that make him look good. He treats her like she's precious instead of convenient. Rachel said the difference between how Nolan treats Danielle and how I treated her was so obvious that it made everyone uncomfortable to remember our relationship. Then Rachel told me she needed to finish her shopping and walked away. I stood there holding my stupid bag of apples and watched her disappear around the corner. The following Monday at work, I got called into my manager's office. I thought maybe I was finally getting the promotion I had been working toward for the past 8 months. I had taken on extra projects and stayed late and done everything right to prove I deserved to move up. But my manager told me the promotion was going to someone else. Someone who had been with the company for less time than me and had fewer accomplishments on paper. I asked why, and my manager looked uncomfortable. He said the decision came down to team dynamics and long-term reliability. He said the leadership team had concerns about my judgment and character based on how I handled personal situations. I knew immediately he was talking about Danielle and Vanessa. My manager said people noticed how I became someone different once I got successful. How I started treating relationships like transactions, where I could trade up whenever something better came along. He said the company values loyalty and integrity, and they weren't confident I would stick with projects or teams if something shinier appeared. I walked back to my desk feeling sick. My professional reputation had suffered because of how I handled my personal life. People saw me discard someone who supported me for years the moment I thought I deserved better, and that affected how they viewed my character at work. Later that week, Rowan stopped by my desk after most people had left for the day. He sat down in the empty chair next to me and asked how I was doing. I said I was fine, but he gave me a look that said he knew I was lying. Rowan told me he wanted to be honest about something that might be hard to hear. He said I used to be seen as a team player who valued relationships and treated people well. But after the Danielle situation, people started worrying I would abandon projects or colleagues if something better came along. He said the promotion decision wasn't just about my work performance. It was about whether leadership could trust me to stay committed when things got difficult or boring. Rowan said my career plateau was a direct result of damaged trust. He told me people talk and everyone knew I left a woman who supported me through everything for someone who looked better on paper. He said that kind of decision shows what someone values deep down, and it made people question whether I would make similar choices at work. Rowan wasn't being mean. He was trying to help me understand why my career had stalled. But hearing it out loud made me realize how much damage I had done to myself in every area of my life. I tried to throw myself into work to avoid thinking about everything. I took on extra assignments and volunteered for projects nobody else wanted. I stayed late every night and came in early every morning. But I had lost the drive I used to have. The work felt empty and pointless. I used to care about advancing my career and making more money and getting recognition. Now I just showed up and went through the motions because I didn't know what else to do with my time. The career success that seemed so important when I left Danielle felt meaningless without someone to share it with or come home to. I would finish a big project and have nobody to tell about it. I would get praise from my manager and feel nothing because there was nobody waiting at home who actually cared. I realized that all the professional success in the world didn't matter if I was alone in a studio apartment eating takeout and watching TV until I fell asleep. Danielle used to make my accomplishments feel meaningful because she was genuinely proud of me. She would celebrate my wins and comfort me through my losses. Without her, work was just work. Success was just checking boxes that led nowhere. My mom called one evening and asked if I wanted to come over for dinner on Sunday. I said yes because I had nothing else to do, and eating alone in my apartment was getting depressing. When I showed up at her house, she hugged me, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes when she looked at me. She loved Danielle like a daughter. She used to talk about how excited she was for us to get married and have grandchildren. She had already started collecting baby clothes and books because she was so sure Danielle and I would give her grandkids someday. Now when she looked at me, she saw someone who threw all of that away for no good reason. We sat down to eat and made small talk about work and her garden and the neighbors. But I could feel the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. She kept glancing at me like she wanted to say something but wasn't sure how to start. Finally, I asked her what was wrong, and she put down her fork and looked at me with sad eyes. My mom told me she ran into Danielle and Nolan at church 2 weeks ago. They were sitting together in the pew holding hands and looking happy. After the service, Danielle came over to say hello and introduced Nolan. My mom said Danielle was glowing in a way she never quite glowed with me. Danielle and Nolan invited my mom to their wedding. They said they would love to have her there because Danielle still considered my mom family after all the years we were together. My mom said she's planning to go to the wedding because she stayed close with Danielle even after our breakup. I didn't know my mom and Danielle had maintained a relationship. I thought when we broke up that Danielle would disappear from all our lives. But my mom said Danielle still calls her every few weeks to check in and ask how she's doing. Danielle sends her cards on holidays and remembered her birthday last month. My mom said Danielle treats her with the same kindness and thoughtfulness she always did, even though I'm the one who ended our relationship. I sat there at my mom's dinner table and realized my own mother chose to maintain a relationship with my ex-girlfriend because Danielle was genuinely kind to her for 6 years. Danielle didn't have to keep calling my mom or sending cards or inviting her to the wedding. But she did it anyway because that's who Danielle is. She treats people well even when they're connected to someone who hurt her. My mom said Danielle still asks about me every time they talk. She wants to know if I'm doing okay and if I'm happy. My mom said she doesn't know how to answer those questions because I'm clearly not doing okay or happy, but she doesn't want to worry Danielle. Hearing that Danielle still cares enough to ask about me made the guilt even heavier. After everything I put her through, she's still kind enough to hope I'm doing well. Meanwhile, I destroyed her life and broke her heart, and she had to heal from all of that alone. I asked my mom why she's going to Danielle's wedding. I asked if it bothered her that she's celebrating my ex-girlfriend marrying someone else. My mom looked at me like I had asked the stupidest question in the world. She said she's going because Danielle earned her love and respect over 6 years of treating our family well. She said Danielle was always thoughtful and kind and made an effort to be part of our lives. She remembered everyone's birthdays and brought gifts to family dinners and asked my mom questions about her life and actually cared about the answers. My mom said blood doesn't excuse my behavior and Danielle deserved better than I gave her. She said she's proud to watch Danielle marry someone who appreciates her worth because Danielle deserves that happiness. My mom told me she loves me because I'm her son, but she's not proud of who I became when I left Danielle. She said I turned into someone who values appearance over substance and trades loyalty for excitement. She said she hopes someday I'll become the person Danielle believed I was, but right now she's just disappointed. We finished dinner in silence and I drove home feeling worse than I had in weeks. The next day, I had my regular therapy appointment with Micah. I told him about running into Rachel at the grocery store and getting passed over for the promotion and having dinner with my mom. I told him about Danielle inviting my mom to her wedding and how my own mother chose to maintain a relationship with my ex-girlfriend. Micah listened to everything and then asked me what all of these experiences had in common. I said they all made me feel terrible about myself. He said that was true, but there was something deeper connecting them. He said I'm grieving multiple losses at the same time. I'm grieving the relationship with Danielle and the future we could have had together. I'm grieving the child I never knew about and never got to meet. I'm grieving the person I used to be before ego corrupted my values. Micah said most people grieve one loss at a time, but I'm trying to process several devastating losses all at once. He said the weight of all that grief is why I feel so stuck and hopeless. I'm not just sad about losing Danielle. I'm sad about losing the version of myself who deserved someone like Danielle. I'm sad about the life we could have built and the family we could have raised. I'm sad about the person I became and the damage I caused. Micah said grief this complicated takes time to process, and I need to be patient with myself. But sitting in his office talking about all the ways I destroyed my own life didn't make me feel patient. It just made me feel tired and broken and alone. I left therapy that afternoon and drove straight home, but instead of turning on the TV or ordering food, I just sat on my couch staring at nothing. Part of me kept checking my phone every few minutes, even though I knew Danielle wouldn't text. I kept hoping for some message or missed call that would give me an excuse to reach out, some sign that maybe she still thought about me, or wondered how I was doing. At my next session, I admitted this to Micah, and he sat back in his chair with that look he gets when he's about to tell me something I don't want to hear. He said hoping for Danielle to reach out was selfish, because it meant I wanted her to break her own healing just to make me feel less alone. He said I was still putting my comfort above her well-being, the same pattern that destroyed our relationship in the first place. Micah asked what I would actually say to Danielle if I could talk to her right now, and I had to think about it for a long time. I realized I wanted to tell her that none of what happened was her fault, that she was always enough and I was just too stupid and shallow to see it. I wanted her to know the miscarriage wasn't something she deserved, and our breakup wasn't because she failed at anything. But then Micah reminded me that reaching out now would only be for my benefit, not hers. He said Danielle had moved on and built a new life, and me showing up with apologies would just disrupt her peace to ease my guilt. The conversation left me feeling worse than before, because even my desire to apologize was selfish. That night I had the first dream about the life we could have had together. In the dream, Danielle and I were looking at houses with a realtor, and she was pregnant and glowing. We walked through a place with a big backyard, and she kept talking about where we'd put a swing set and how we'd paint the nursery. I woke up in my studio apartment at 3 in the morning, and the contrast between dream and reality hit me so hard I couldn't breathe. I got up and walked around my tiny space, looking at the bare walls and secondhand furniture, thinking about the house Danielle was living in now with someone else. I thought about the child we lost and all the years we could have spent raising them together, watching them grow up in that house with the big backyard. Instead, I was alone in a place that didn't feel like home, and Danielle was building all of those things with a man who actually deserved her. The next day at work, I was getting coffee in the break room when I heard two co-workers talking near the vending machines. They didn't see me standing there, and they were discussing Danielle's wedding coming up in a few months. One of them mentioned she had already RSVP'd yes and was excited to see Danielle again because she was such a sweet person. The other one said she remembered when Danielle used to come to company events with me and how nice she always was to everyone. They talked about how Danielle would remember people's names and ask about their families, how she made everyone feel important, even though she didn't work there. I stood there holding my empty coffee cup, realizing how many of my coworkers had stayed friends with Danielle after we broke up. They spoke about her with real warmth and respect, the same way they used to talk about us as a couple, except now I wasn't part of that story anymore. I went back to my desk and made the mistake of checking social media during lunch. Danielle's engagement party photos were all over my feed because we still had mutual friends. She was wearing a blue dress and smiling bigger than I'd ever seen her smile with me. She looked genuinely happy in a way that made my chest hurt, and in every photo where she was looking at him, he was looking back at her with this expression of complete adoration. I scrolled through dozens of pictures and saw how he held her hand and kept his arm around her waist and looked at her like she was the most important person in any room. That's when I understood he valued everything I had taken for granted. He saw her worth while I had been too busy looking for something flashier and more exciting. My next therapy session came a few days later, and I completely broke down in Micah's office. I told him I threw away the best thing in my life because I thought I deserved better, when the truth was, I never deserved Danielle at all. I said she gave me 6 years of loyalty and support and love, and I repaid her by deciding she wasn't good enough once I got a promotion and some attention from other women. Micah let me cry for a while, and then asked if I could forgive myself for what I did. I sat there trying to think of an answer, but I honestly didn't know if I should forgive myself. Some mistakes feel too big to move past, and destroying the best relationship I ever had because of ego and stupidity felt like one of those mistakes. After therapy, I drove around the city for a while with no real destination in mind. I ended up passing the Italian restaurant where Vanessa and I had our first date, the place with the expensive wine list and dim lighting that I thought made me look successful. I pulled into the parking lot and just sat there staring at the building, feeling nothing but disgust at who I became during those 8 months. I had been so focused on how Vanessa made me look to other people that I never stopped to ask if she made me happy or better. I never questioned whether impressing strangers with a beautiful girlfriend was worth losing someone who actually cared about me. The restaurant looked different now, smaller and less impressive, and I realized it had never been about the place or the experience. It had all been about feeding my ego and convincing myself I had upgraded my life. My mom called that weekend while I was doing laundry in my apartment building's basement. She wanted to tell me about Danielle's bridal shower that had happened the day before. She said Danielle looked radiant, and all her friends kept talking about how happy she seemed. My mom told me Danielle's friends spent the whole afternoon saying how great her man was, how he showed up for her in ways that mattered. They talked about how he never made Danielle feel like she had to compete for his attention or prove her worth. They said he was present and appreciative and committed, everything a partner should be. I stood there in the basement holding my laundry basket while my mom talked, and all I could think was that Danielle found with him what she tried to build with me. I realized Danielle had wanted a genuine partnership based on mutual respect and appreciation, and she tried to create that with me for 6 years. But I was always looking past her towards something that seemed better or more exciting. The difference between me and him was simple. He recognized Danielle's value from the start, while I took it for granted until it was too late. He treated her partnership like the gift it was, while I treated it like a stepping stone to something flashier. A few days later, my coworker sent out a group text inviting everyone to hang out at a bar after work on Friday. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back that I couldn't make it. I knew if I went, they would all talk about Danielle's wedding since half of them were invited. They would share stories about seeing her recently and how excited she was about marrying him. I couldn't sit there and listen to everyone celebrate the life she built after I destroyed what we had. I was isolating myself more and more because every social situation felt like a reminder of what I threw away. Every conversation somehow circled back to Danielle, or relationships, or the importance of appreciating what you have. I spent that Friday night alone in my apartment eating leftover pizza and scrolling through old photos on my phone, torturing myself with memories of a life I could have kept if I hadn't been so stupid and selfish. I showed up to my next therapy session and sat down across from Micah without saying anything at first. He waited like he always did, letting the silence stretch until I was ready to talk. Finally, he asked what I had been thinking about since our last meeting, and I told him I had been stuck on the same question over and over. He asked what question, and I said I kept wondering what the point of learning anything was when I had already destroyed everything that mattered. Micah leaned forward and asked me to explain what I meant by that. I told him I could sit here and have all these insights about my mistakes and understand exactly where I went wrong, but none of it changed what happened to Danielle or brought back the life we could have had together. He nodded slowly and said that was true. Personal growth wouldn't undo the past or erase the consequences of my choices. Then he asked me if I thought that meant growth was pointless, and I said I honestly didn't know anymore. Micah was quiet for a moment before he asked me to consider what kind of person I wanted to be moving forward, not for Danielle or anyone else, but for myself. I struggled to answer because the question felt impossible when all I could think about was what I had already lost. He pushed me to really think about it and asked what I had learned from this experience that could prevent me from making the same mistakes again. I sat there trying to come up with something meaningful, but everything I thought of felt hollow and useless. Finally, I said I learned that I took something real for granted while chasing something that only looked good on the surface, but even saying it out loud felt pointless because the lesson came too late to matter. Micah pointed out that the lesson still mattered, even if it couldn't fix what I broke, because it could shape who I became from this point forward. I left his office feeling no better than when I arrived. The following Saturday, I drove to a community center on the other side of town and walked inside to ask about volunteer opportunities. The woman at the front desk handed me a form and told me they needed help with their weekend meal program for families. I filled out the paperwork and showed up the next weekend to start serving food and cleaning tables. The work was simple and kept me busy for a few hours, which was better than sitting alone in my apartment staring at the walls. I came back the following weekend and the one after that, falling into a routine of showing up every Saturday and Sunday morning. The other volunteers were friendly, and the families we served were grateful, and for those few hours I felt like I was doing something that mattered. But as soon as I got back to my apartment, the emptiness returned, and I was right back to thinking about Danielle and everything I threw away. The volunteer work gave me something to do, but it didn't fill the hole inside me or make the regret any easier to carry. One Sunday afternoon, while I was wiping down tables, another volunteer started talking to me about why she had started coming to the center. She said she was going through a divorce and needed something positive to focus on instead of sitting home alone feeling sorry for herself. I asked what happened, and she told me her husband had left her for someone younger after 15 years of marriage. She said one day he just told her he wasn't happy anymore and moved out within a week to be with this other woman. I stood there holding a dirty rag, listening to her describe almost exactly what I had done to Danielle, except this time I was hearing it from the other side. She talked about how she spent months wondering what she did wrong and trying to figure out how she could have been better, even though deep down she knew it wasn't really about her. She said her husband just decided he deserved something different, and nothing she could have done would have changed his mind once he checked out. I felt sick listening to her because I could picture Danielle going through the same thing, blaming herself and trying to fix something that was never her fault to begin with. The woman said she was doing better now and had accepted that some people just don't appreciate what they have until it's gone. After she walked away, I had to step outside for a few minutes because I couldn't handle being around anyone. I had put Danielle through exactly what this woman described, and I had been too selfish and stupid to see it from her perspective until now. That night, I sat down at my kitchen table with a notebook and started writing a letter to Danielle. I wrote that I was sorry for not seeing her value when we were together and for making her feel like she wasn't enough. I wrote that everything she did for me over 6 years was more than I deserved, and I had been too blind to appreciate any of it. I kept writing, and the letter got longer and longer as I remembered specific things she did that I had taken for granted. I wrote about how she picked up extra shifts to help pay for my certification and never complained when my promotion meant seeing me less. I wrote about how she made my coffee perfect every morning and listened to me vent about work even when she had her own problems. I wrote about how she tried so hard to fix our relationship at the end when I had already decided to leave, and how none of my unhappiness was ever her fault. The letter ended up being 10 pages front and back, filled with apologies and acknowledgments of everything I failed to see until it was too late. When I finished writing, I folded it up and put it in my desk drawer because I knew I would never send it. The letter wasn't really for Danielle anyway. It was just my way of trying to process feelings I didn't know what else to do with. I brought the letter to my next therapy session, and Micah asked if he could read it. I handed it over and watched him go through all 10 pages while I sat there feeling exposed and uncomfortable. When he finished, he set it down on the table between us and said this was real progress. He said for the first time since we started meeting, I was taking full accountability for what happened without making excuses or trying to justify my choices. I asked him what good accountability did when it couldn't change anything, and he said it mattered because it showed I was finally being honest with myself about who I was and what I did. He said personal growth didn't erase the past, but it could prevent me from repeating the same patterns in the future. I told him I didn't see much point in growing as a person when I had already lost the only person who mattered. And he reminded me that growth wasn't about getting Danielle back. It was about becoming someone who wouldn't make those mistakes again with anyone else. The conversation felt like we were going in circles because nothing he said made me feel any less empty or regretful. Before the session ended, I asked Micah if he thought there was any path forward where I could actually be happy again. He was quiet for a long moment before he answered, and when he finally spoke, he was more direct than usual. He said happiness was possible, but it would never erase what I did or take away the regret I would carry. He said some choices have permanent consequences, and this was one of them, and I would spend the rest of my life knowing I threw away something real for something shallow. He said I could build a good life eventually, and maybe even find love again, but I would always carry the weight of losing Danielle and the future we could have had together. I asked if that meant I was just supposed to accept feeling this way forever, and he said accepting it was different from letting it destroy me. He said I could learn to live with the regret while still moving forward, or I could let it consume me and waste whatever time I had left. Neither option sounded good, but at least he was being honest instead of giving me false hope that everything would eventually be okay. The week of Danielle's wedding arrived, and I sent an email to my boss requesting time off. I told him I had some personal things to deal with and needed to take a few days away from the office. He approved it without asking questions, and I spent that Monday through Friday alone in my apartment. I knew at least half the people from work were going to the wedding because Danielle had stayed friends with so many of them even after we broke up. I couldn't handle being around anyone who would be there or hearing them talk about it afterward, so taking the time off felt like the only option. I spent most of those days lying on my couch or sitting at my kitchen table thinking about what could have been. I thought about the house we had planned to buy, and the kids Danielle wanted to have, and the life we had talked about building together. All of it was happening now, but with someone else, and I was the only person to blame for not being part of it. Saturday morning came, and I woke up knowing it was Danielle's wedding day. I made coffee and sat down at my desk and opened the folder on my laptop where I had saved old photos of us together. There were pictures from our first apartment and trips we took and random moments from 6 years of being together. In every single photo, Danielle was smiling at me or at the camera with genuine happiness, and I could see now how much she loved me in a way I never fully appreciated. I sat there for hours going through those photos and letting myself really feel everything I had lost. I cried harder than I did when Vanessa left me because this time I understood what real loss actually felt like. Losing Vanessa hurt my ego, but losing Danielle destroyed something deeper that I didn't even know I had until it was gone. I thought about her getting ready for the wedding right now, putting on her dress and doing her hair and getting excited to marry someone who actually deserved her. I thought about her walking down the aisle toward a future I could have had if I hadn't been so stupid and selfish. By the time the sun started to set, I was exhausted from crying and thinking and hating myself. My mom called around 8 that evening, and I almost didn't answer because I knew she was calling from the wedding reception. I finally picked up on the 5th ring, and she asked how I was doing. I said I was fine even though we both knew I wasn't, and she said she wanted to tell me about the wedding before I heard about it from someone else. She said it was beautiful, and Danielle looked absolutely radiant walking down the aisle. She said the ceremony was at their church, and everyone was crying happy tears because you could see how much Danielle and Nolan loved each other. My mom told me their vows were about choosing each other every day and never taking their partnership for granted, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from breaking down on the phone. She said the reception was lovely, and everyone kept talking about what a perfect couple they made and how happy they were for Danielle to find someone so good. I listened to all of it feeling like someone was carving out my insides with a dull knife. Before she hung up, I asked my mom if Danielle seemed really happy or if she was just putting on a good show for everyone. My mom was quiet for a second before she said Danielle seemed genuinely at peace in a way she never quite was with me. She said even during our best times together, there was always something a little uncertain in Danielle's eyes, like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. But today at the wedding, that uncertainty was completely gone, and she looked fully secure in her relationship with Nolan. Then my mom said something that hit me harder than anything else. She said looking back now, she could see that I was always looking past Danielle toward the next thing, even before Vanessa came along. She said I treated our relationship like a stepping stone instead of a destination, and Danielle probably sensed that on some level the whole time we were together. My mom said she loved me, but she was glad Danielle found someone who saw her as enough instead of someone who was always searching for something better. After we hung up, I sat in the dark apartment for a long time, thinking about everything she said and knowing it was all true. The next therapy session with Micah came 4 days after the wedding, and I walked into his office feeling like I was carrying 100 pounds of concrete on my shoulders. I sat down in the usual chair, and he asked how I was doing, and I just shook my head because I didn't have words for it. Micah waited quietly while I tried to organize my thoughts, and finally I said that Danielle was married now, and there was no going back, and no second chance, and no future where I could fix what I broke. He nodded and said that accepting finality was one of the hardest parts of grief, and that I had been holding on to hope for reconciliation, even though I knew it wasn't realistic. I admitted he was right, and said that some part of me had been waiting for Danielle to reach out, or for some sign that maybe we could try again someday. Micah asked me what letting go of that hope would mean for me, and I said it meant accepting that I destroyed the best relationship I ever had, and would ever have. He pushed back gently, and said that kind of thinking kept me stuck in the past, instead of allowing me to grow, and potentially find meaningful connection again in the future. I told him I didn't want connection with anyone else because every woman I saw just reminded me of what Danielle had, and they didn't. Micah wrote something down in his notebook and asked me to explain what I meant by that, and I said that I compared every woman to Danielle now, and they all came up short. The barista at the coffee shop near my apartment was friendly, but she wasn't thoughtful like Danielle. A woman at work who asked me to lunch was pretty, but she didn't have Danielle's kindness. I saw couples at restaurants and wondered if those women would support their partners the way Danielle supported me. Micah said that comparing everyone to an idealized memory of Danielle wasn't fair to them or productive for me because I was stuck in the past while Danielle had built a beautiful future. He said I was using these comparisons as a shield to avoid moving forward and risking getting hurt again. I sat with that for a minute and knew he was right but didn't know how to stop doing it. Micah asked me to try something and said he wanted me to envision what my life could look like 5 years from now if I did the work to heal and grow. I closed my eyes and tried to picture it, and said I could see myself having learned to value authentic connection over status and surface-level attraction. I could see myself being the kind of partner who appreciated what he had, instead of always looking for something better. I could see myself treating someone with the respect and loyalty they deserved, instead of taking them for granted. But when Micah asked if I could picture being truly happy in that future, I opened my eyes and said no, because I couldn't undo my biggest mistake. I said that no matter how much I grew or changed, I would always know that I had the real thing and threw it away, and that knowledge would poison any future relationship I tried to have. Micah said that kind of thinking was a choice I was making, and that I could choose differently if I was willing to do the hard work of forgiving myself. I asked him how I was supposed to forgive myself for destroying the life Danielle and I could have had. And for the miscarriage she went through alone, and he said that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or excusing what I did, but rather accepting that I couldn't change the past and choosing to live differently moving forward. The session ended with Micah giving me homework to start journaling daily about what I was learning and feeling as a way to process the regret in healthier ways. I went home and opened a new notebook and stared at the blank page for 20 minutes before I finally started writing. The first entry was just a list of things Danielle used to do that I never appreciated until they were gone. The second entry was about how I convinced myself she wasn't enough, when the truth was, I wasn't enough for her. The third entry was about the baby we lost, and how I would have been a father by now if I hadn't been so selfish and stupid. I kept journaling every day for the next 2 weeks, and every entry was basically the same thing with different words. I recognized what I had and threw away, and I hated myself for it, and I couldn't see a path forward that didn't include that weight. Rowan called me on a Saturday morning and asked if I wanted to grab breakfast, and I almost said no, but decided I needed to get out of my apartment. We met at a diner near my place, and he took one look at me and said, I looked terrible. I told him I felt terrible, and he said he had been worried about me because I seemed stuck in grief and wasn't moving forward. I said I didn't know how to move forward when every day felt like living with the consequences of the worst decision I ever made. Rowan was quiet for a minute while the waitress brought our coffee, and then he said something that surprised me. He said that honoring Danielle's memory meant becoming a better person and learning from my mistakes, not punishing myself forever and wasting the rest of my life. He said that Danielle wouldn't want me to be miserable, and that the best way to respect what we had was to make sure I never treated anyone that way again. I asked him how he knew what Danielle would want, and he reminded me that he met her at that company party and talked to her for almost an hour. He said she told him that night that she just wanted me to be happy and successful, even though she worried I was pulling away from her. Rowan said Danielle was the kind of person who genuinely cared about others, even when they didn't deserve it, and that she would probably feel sad seeing me destroy myself over losing her. I knew he was trying to help, but it didn't make me feel any better, because what Danielle wanted didn't change what I did or what I lost. We finished breakfast, and Rowan made me promise to text him at least once a day, so he knew I was okay, and I agreed, even though I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. A woman from work named Jessica approached me the following Monday and said her friend was single and looking to meet someone, and would I be interested in going on a blind date? I should have said no, but Micah's voice was in my head saying I needed to try moving forward, so I agreed. The date was set for Thursday night at an Italian restaurant downtown, and I spent the whole day dreading it. I met Jessica's friend Sarah at the restaurant, and she was attractive and seemed nice, and under different circumstances, I might have been interested. But within 5 minutes of sitting down, I was comparing her to Danielle. Sarah talked about her job in marketing, and I thought about how Danielle never bragged about her work, but just quietly handled everything. Sarah ordered an expensive wine, and I thought about how Danielle always insisted on splitting bills because she didn't want me to feel used. Sarah checked her phone 3 times during appetizers, and I thought about how Danielle always gave me her full attention when we were together. I tried to focus on the conversation and be present, but everything Sarah said just made me think about what Danielle would have said or done differently. Sarah asked about my hobbies, and I started telling her about a certification program I was considering, and realized halfway through that I was telling the story the same way I used to tell Danielle things, expecting her to care about the details and ask follow-up questions. But Sarah just nodded politely and changed the subject to talk about her own interests. By the time dessert came, I knew I wasn't ready to move forward and probably never would be. Sarah must have sensed it too, because when we said goodbye in the parking lot, she said it was nice meeting me, but she didn't think we were a good match. I agreed, and drove home feeling even more alone than before, because now I had proof that I couldn't connect with anyone else. The next therapy session with Micah was harder than usual, because I had to admit that the date was a disaster, and I spent the whole time comparing Sarah to Danielle. Micah asked me what I was afraid would happen if I stopped comparing everyone to Danielle, and I said I was afraid it would mean moving on and forgetting what we had. He said that was the core issue, and that I was afraid moving forward meant betraying Danielle or admitting that what we had wasn't special. But Micah said staying stuck didn't honor what we had, and it just wasted more of my life. He asked me what Danielle would say if she could see me now, and I said she would probably tell me to stop being stupid and go live my life. Micah smiled and said that sounded right based on everything I had told him about her, and asked why I wasn't listening to that voice. I said, because moving forward felt impossible when I knew I had already experienced the best relationship I would ever have and ruined it. Micah challenged me on that and said I was romanticizing the past and turning Danielle into an impossible standard that no one could meet. He said that while Danielle was clearly a wonderful partner, she was also a real person with flaws and limitations, and that I was doing her a disservice by making her into some perfect ideal. I got defensive and said I wasn't making her into anything, I was just recognizing what I lost. But Micah pushed back and said there was a difference between acknowledging my mistakes and using those mistakes as an excuse to never risk getting hurt again. The session ended with me feeling angry and frustrated because I didn't want to hear that I was using Danielle as an excuse, but deep down, I knew Micah was probably right. I decided to visit the coffee shop where Danielle and I first met one last time because I needed some kind of closure even though I didn't know what that would look like. The same barista was working and she smiled when she saw me come in. I ordered my usual drink, and when she handed it to me, I thanked her for all the memories this place held. She looked confused, so I explained that this was where I met my ex-girlfriend 6 years ago, and we used to come here all the time. The barista's face lit up with recognition, and she said she remembered us, and asked how Danielle was doing. I told her Danielle got married recently and was really happy, and the barista said that was wonderful, and she was glad things worked out. I didn't correct her assumption that things worked out for both of us. I sat at the same table where Danielle accidentally grabbed my drink that first day, and thought about how different my life would be if I had valued what we built together. After about 30 minutes, I threw away my empty cup and walked out, knowing I couldn't keep coming back to these places and romanticizing the past. If I was ever going to accept the present, I needed to stop revisiting locations that only reminded me of what I lost. My mom called that weekend and said she had lunch with Danielle and Nolan the day before, and they seemed really happy together. She said they were talking about starting to try for a baby soon, and Danielle was glowing when she talked about future plans. I felt like someone punched me in the stomach because Danielle was going to have the family she always wanted, just not with me. My mom must have heard something in my silence because she asked if I was okay, and I said I was fine even though we both knew I wasn't. She said she wanted to be honest with me about something, and then told me she was planning to stay in touch with Danielle and Nolan because she had grown to love Danielle over the years we were together. I told her I understood, and that I was actually glad Danielle had people who loved her and supported her. Then I asked my mom to please stop telling me updates about Danielle's life, because I needed to let her go, and I couldn't do that if I kept hearing about how happy she was. My mom was quiet for a second, and then said she understood and would respect my wishes. She said she loved me, and hoped I would find a way to forgive myself someday, and I said I loved her too before we hung up. 6 months had passed since I learned about the miscarriage, and I was still seeing Micah every week and still living alone in my studio apartment. I had made progress in understanding my mistakes and recognizing the patterns that led me to throw away the best relationship I ever had. I could articulate now that I had valued external validation over authentic connection, and that I had treated Danielle like a stepping stone instead of a destination. I understood that my ego and insecurity had driven me to pursue Vanessa, and that I had destroyed something real for something that was never going to last. But understanding my mistakes didn't bring me peace or happiness. I still woke up most mornings with a weight in my chest and went to bed most nights thinking about what could have been. I had learned all these lessons about valuing what you have and treating people with respect and not taking genuine partnership for granted. But those lessons came too late to save what mattered most. Some consequences were permanent, and some losses couldn't be recovered from, and I was learning to live with that reality, even though it hurt every single day. 2 weeks after my mom stopped giving me updates about Danielle, my boss called me into his office and told me the senior position had opened up again. The previous guy took a job in another city, and they wanted to offer it to me if I was still interested. I sat there looking at him and realized this was the promotion I had been passed over for months ago, when everyone lost trust in me after the Vanessa situation. He said I had proven my commitment over the past year and rebuilt the professional relationships I damaged. I accepted because I needed something good to happen, even though I knew it wouldn't change how I felt inside. The raise was significant, and the new responsibilities were exactly what I had wanted back when I thought career success mattered more than anything else. My coworkers congratulated me and took me out for drinks after work, and I smiled and thanked everyone while feeling completely empty. I went home to my studio apartment that night and sat on my couch looking at the promotion letter and couldn't think of a single person I wanted to call and celebrate with. Danielle would have been so proud and would have made my favorite dinner and told everyone she knew about my success. Now I had the career advancement I thought I deserved, but nobody to share it with, and the achievement felt pointless. I kept the promotion letter on my kitchen counter for a week, and every time I looked at it, I thought about how much I had sacrificed to get here and whether any of it was actually worth it. Success without character and integrity was just an empty title that didn't make me happy or fulfilled. At my next therapy session, I told Micah about the promotion, and he said it was a positive step forward in rebuilding my professional life. He reminded me that I had done important work over the past months in understanding my mistakes and developing genuine insight into why I made the choices I did. Micah said I was ready to start moving forward, and that I had the tools now to build healthier relationships and make better decisions. I sat there listening to him talk about my progress and growth, but I couldn't make myself believe any of it mattered. The regret I felt about losing Danielle hadn't lessened even with all the therapy and self-reflection. Understanding why I destroyed the best relationship I ever had didn't bring her back or undo the damage I caused. I told Micah I appreciated everything he had done for me, but I wasn't sure I would ever forgive myself for what I threw away. He looked at me with that patient expression therapists have and said healing wasn't about forgetting or forgiving myself completely, but about learning to live with my choices and their consequences. The following week, my landlord knocked on my door with the lease renewal papers, and I signed them without really thinking about it. This studio apartment was my life now, and would probably be my life for the foreseeable future. It was smaller and lonelier than the place I shared with Danielle, but I earned this through my own choices and actions. I thought about her often, and wondered if she was happy with Nolan, and whether they were trying for a baby, yet like my mom mentioned before I asked her to stop telling me updates. It hurt to picture Danielle thriving without me, but I hoped she was building the life she always deserved with someone who actually appreciated her. I looked around my small apartment with its basic furniture and lack of personal touches, and accepted that this was what I deserved after treating someone good, like she was disposable. Some mistakes couldn't be fixed or forgiven no matter how much insight I gained or how sorry I felt. Danielle was out there somewhere building a beautiful life with a man who recognized her value while I was alone in a studio apartment, understanding too late what real love actually looked like. The lesson cost me everything that mattered, and there was no redemption story that would make that okay, or bring back what I lost. I learned that success and status meant nothing without someone genuine to share it with, and that ego could destroy the most important things in life faster than anything else. But learning those lessons after I already threw everything away didn't give me peace or happiness, and probably never would.